This is a video about morality. It's a video addressing the argument or arguments of a man named Sam Harris, who's a popular atheist. He's, I believe, a neuroscientist. And he had a debate with Dr. William Lane Craig, a Christian, over the topic of God's existence. And I want to expose as foolish and moronic Sam Harris's worldview and what he says about morality. It's good to define terms starting out. So morality is what one is obligated to do according to a set of rules or laws that are dealt out by a lawgiver or rule giver. So when we're talking about morality, we have to establish that first. We have to know what morality is before we can even talk about it. If there is no law that says you should not do this, then there cannot be any sense of I should do this. I am wrong for not doing this if I don't do this, because the law. There cannot be a sense of right or wrong, and you cannot label something as wrong if there is no law that says this is wrong. This is the definition of wrong. This action should not be done. So you have to have a law in place that says this is something you should not do. How does Sam Harris formulate his conception of morality? Well, let's listen to him. Let's listen to his argument.
Now, in claiming that values reduce to the well-being of conscious creatures, as I will, I'm introducing two concepts, consciousness and well-being. Now, let's start with consciousness. This is not an arbitrary starting point. Imagine a universe devoid of the possibility of consciousness. Imagine a universe entirely constituted of rocks. Okay, there's clearly no happiness or suffering in this universe. There's no good or evil. Value judgments don't apply. For changes in the universe to matter, they have to matter at least potentially to some conscious system. Okay, what about well-being? Well, the well-being of conscious creatures and the link between that and morality may seem open to doubt, but it shouldn't. Okay, here's the only assumption you have to make. Imagine a universe in which every conscious creature suffers as much as it possibly can for as long as it can. I call this the worst possible misery for everyone. Okay, the worst possible misery for everyone is bad.
Okay, notice how he's basing morality off of suffering at this point. Instead of defining bad as what is said to be bad by a lawgiver or a rule, this should not be done, he is now he's defining what is bad based off of the feelings produced by certain chemical reactions in the brain. And at least according to his worldview, that's how he would see it. And maybe he believes that there's spiritual pain, but he seems to be a naturalist who's very centered on his worldview is very centered around the material, and so for him, I'm sure he would define pain as something that does involve physical chemical reactions in the brain as something that's produced throughout the human life, and that pain comes from that.
If the word bad applies anywhere, it applies here. Now, if you think the worst possible misery for everyone isn't bad, or maybe it has a silver lining, or maybe there's something worse, I don't know what you're talking about. And what's more, I'm pretty sure you don't know what you're talking about either.
So he's now saying that his conception of morality based off of suffering is undeniable to any human, and that people don't know what they're talking about if they contradict what he's saying, and that he doesn't know what they're talking about. If pain, the worst possible pain experienced by everyone, if that's not bad, then he doesn't know what we're talking about. But that's his opinion. So he becomes the lawgiver in this instance. So in his conception of reality, he has deemed that the experience of certain chemical reactions in the brain should not happen. These ones that produce suffering. And that's how he arrives at morality. You should not do this. This should not happen. This should not be because of these chemical reactions existing. Basically, all he has to go off of is he doesn't like these chemical reactions. He thinks that they shouldn't happen. He doesn't like certain things happening. That's not a law from a lawgiver, and if it is a law, it would just be his law. So I guess you could define it as a law, his law, but the problem is there's a bunch of other self-made laws by a bunch of other people who could disagree with them, and they could say, well, I don't define everyone having the worst amount of suffering possible as bad. I don't define that as bad. I'm a masochist, and I define that as good. I want pain, I desire pain, and I desire the greatest amount of pain that I can possibly experience. Someone could say that, and just because it's extremely unlikely that no one would say that doesn't mean that someone couldn't say that and also be giving a morality that's just as valid, just as acceptable as his. Just because there are more people who side with Harris and his what he would want to happen, just because everybody basically doesn't want the worst amount of misery for themselves, doesn't mean that that's what morality is. It just means that a bunch of people have the same opinion about something. A bunch of people have the same opinion about certain chemical reactions. A bunch of people don't like chemical reactions that create pain. But someone could come along and say, well, I actually, in my moral system, it's good for everyone to experience the most amount of pain that they could possibly experience, and that's what I say should happen. I'm the lawgiver in my own moral system, and I deem that everyone should have the most amount of pain that they can possibly experience. And that person might have different reasons for why they would say that, but they could say it, and it's just as valid as what he's saying. There's no way to differentiate between the person who says that and the person who says what Harris says. There's no way to differentiate. There's no ultimate lawgiver to appeal to say, well, this one is true, this one is false, this one is correct, this is not correct. All you have is just conflicting opinions, and anybody can because Sam Harris is not the creator of the universe, because he's not the ultimate being, his conception of morality is not actually morality, it's just his opinion. And anybody else could come up with a different opinion that contradicts him. And there's no way to arbitrate between them and say, this one is actually right, this one is actually wrong, and say, this is actual true morality. In the atheistic worldview, this doesn't exist. In the Christian worldview, that being does exist. It's God who created the universe, who tells us what morality is. He says this is wrong, therefore it's wrong, because he determines the nature of reality. He says you should not do this, therefore you should not do it, because he's the one who determines the nature of reality. He makes the rules. He is the lawgiver, and therefore morality is objective in the sense that it applies to everyone. There's not a bunch of different conflicting opinions about what's right or what's wrong. You have one standard that applies to all people, and everyone is going to be judged by that objective standard. It's objective in the sense that it's going to be used to judge and punish and inflict pain on or give reward to everyone. Everyone will be judged by that standard. That's objective morality. Everyone is held to that one standard. Everyone is held to those laws. The one lawgiver gives his laws to all people All people have the work of the law written on their heart. They will all be judged by that law, and therefore objective morality exists. And we have weight behind our argument when we say, as Christians, you should not do that. It's because the lawgiver said you should not do that. And morality can only exist if there is a lawgiver who punishes and judges all people according to the same law that applies everywhere at all times. Without that, you can't call it morality, you just have preferences. You have values. And he's talking about values and where we get values. And he understands, Sam Harris understands that morality is basically based on values, but there's no way he can make it objective. There's no way he can have any weight behind his argument to say this should happen or this shouldn't happen, because he's not appealing to a lawgiver who gives his law to everyone, who holds everyone accountable to that law, who's going to torment you forever if you don't follow that law.
What I'm saying is the minimum standard of moral goodness is to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone. If we should do anything in this universe, if we ought to do anything, if we have a moral duty to do anything, it's to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone.
Why? Why is that? He has no way of explaining that. He just asserts it and thinks that because everybody will agree with him and it's undeniable, or he thinks it's undeniable, that he thinks that's a good argument. No, just because a lot of people will agree with you, and just because you think it's incredibly hard to find anybody who would disagree with you, that doesn't mean you made a good argument. It doesn't mean what you said is true. Why should certain chemical reactions be avoided in his worldview? If God doesn't exist, there's no ultimate lawgiver, there is no, in the nature of reality, you should not do this, then all you have is preferences, and he prefers that certain chemical reactions don't happen. Well, a masochist and a sadist prefer that those same chemical reactions do happen. The masochist wants to experience pain. The sadist wants to inflict pain on other people. How can he say they're wrong? Psychopaths want to inflict pain and inflict violations on people's bodies. And how could he possibly have any weight behind his argument to say you shouldn't do that? All he can say is, I don't like that. All he can do is just emote about it.
And the moment you admit this, you admit that all other states of the universe are better than the worst possible misery for everyone. You have the worst possible misery for everyone over here, and all these other constellation of experiences arrayed out here. And because...
Well, you say they're better, but that doesn't mean everybody has to say they're better. It doesn't mean they're objectively better. It doesn't mean that you know for sure that they're better. How do you justify that belief that any other state besides constant worst possible misery for everyone is better? How can you say that? How can you justify the belief?
You can be... What I'm saying is the minimum standard of moral goodness is to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone. If we should do anything in this universe, if we ought to do anything, if we have a moral duty to do anything, it's to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone. And the moment you admit this...
Well, the psychopath would disagree with you, and how can you have any weight behind your argument when you say, hey, psychopath, you're wrong. All you're doing is emoting about what you believe. Well, that's your opinion. The psychopath has a different opinion. How do you decide who's right or who's wrong? Well, God's law tells us who's right and who's wrong. There's a law that applies to everybody. The creator of the universe will tell you if you're right or you're wrong, not these human beings who are on an equal playing level, who didn't create the universe, who exist on this ball that's spinning through space. Your opinion is just as good as anybody else's opinion in your own worldview, Sam.
You admit that all other states of the universe are better than the worst possible misery for everyone. You have the worst possible misery for everyone over here, and all these other constellation of experiences arrayed out here. And because the experience of conscious creatures is dependent in some way on the laws of nature, there will be right and wrong ways to move along this continuum. It will be possible to think you're avoiding the worst possible misery for everyone and to fail.
It's just your opinion. We shouldn't have certain chemical reactions. We shouldn't have certain chemical reactions occur in our brains that produce what we call suffering. Well, that's just your opinion. Other people might like the suffering. Other people might want to give those chemical reactions to other people because that's their sense of morality. That's their values. So how do you arbitrate between values? How do you say these values are wrong, these values are right? You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that when all you have is just billions of different consciousnesses with different opinions, with different values. There needs to be a higher law that governs all of the people who are giving themselves their own laws. We can't have tons of different lawmakers that govern themselves by their own laws. We need the ultimate law from the lawgiver who created everybody to tell us this person is actually wrong because there's a higher law above their own opinions. And people are not a law unto themselves, and they can't just create their own morality because there's always somebody who could contradict that morality and say, well, it's my opinion that you're wrong. And now that person's law can't be objective, it can't be the standard because somebody else disagrees with it, and there's no reason in an atheistic worldview to think that one person's opinion is any better than anybody else's. He's just assuming it. He's just assuming that chemical reactions associated with pain shouldn't happen. Well, he can't justify that belief in his worldview. If we evolved out of stardust and we're the random product of an evolutionary process, there's no way to justify the belief that certain chemical reactions associated with pain should not happen. It's just ridiculous. Like, why? They're just chemical reactions at the end of the day. And they produce what you don't like. Okay, why should I care about what you like? If I like something, if the psychopath says, if I like cutting people's heads off, who are you to tell me I can't? That's what I like. That's my moral value system. I like creating pain. That's what the psychopath could say. And he has nothing. He's got evolutionary biology. Oh, you evolved from fish. So that's why you shouldn't kill people. People are highly evolved animals. You shouldn't kill people. You shouldn't cause pain in people's consciousnesses. Oh, but, well, I'll drive my car and hit a bunch of insects and kill them and cause them pain on my way to work. I'm sure Harris does that. I'm sure Harris doesn't take any precautions to try to not kill the bugs that get slaughtered as he drives to work. Like he's not consistent. Like, is he super careful when he walks around on the ground so he doesn't kill ants by stepping on them? And like, because those are conscious creatures. Those insects feel pain. Those insects have a consciousness. So Harris's worldview is so completely absurd. He can't even be consistent with his own worldview. If he was, he would never drive a car, because when you drive a car, you inflict damage and pain on conscious insect creatures. Is Harris going to be true to his worldview? Is it all about pain? Is it all about what a consciousness suffers and should not suffer, what they should suffer, what they do suffer? Is that what morality is based on? Is it based on suffering? No, he doesn't even live like this. It's based off the laws of God. God tells us what suffering is justifiable and what suffering is not.
About how to navigate this space. So here's my argument for moral truth in the context of science. Questions of right and wrong and good and evil depend upon minds. Okay, they depend upon the possibility of experience. Minds are natural phenomena. They depend upon the laws of nature in some way. Okay, morality and human values, therefore, can be understood through science, because in talking about these things, we are talking about all of the facts that influence the well-being of conscious creatures.
And why is consciousness even relevant to the topic? Insects are conscious. Sam Harris murders insects on his way to work when he drives his car. What in the world, Sam? What are you doing? Why are you being so inconsistent?
In our case, we're talking about genetics and neurobiology and psychology and sociology and economics. Now, I view this space of all possible experience as a kind of moral landscape with peaks that correspond to the heights of well-being and valleys that correspond to the lowest suffering. And the first thing to realize is that there may be many equivalent peaks in this space. There may be many different but morally equivalent ways for human beings to thrive. But there will be many more ways not to thrive. There'll be many more ways to fail to be on a peak. There are clearly more ways to suffer unnecessarily in this world than to be sublimely happy.
Well, who determines if it's unnecessary or necessary? The psychopath could say, well, it's necessary for my victims to suffer because it gives me pleasure. And their sense of morality is, I want as much pleasure as I want, and causing people pain gives me pleasure. Like, who's the arbiter of all this? There's no ultimate authority to determine what's true about morality here. Like, this is just so absurd.
Now, the Taliban are still my favorite example of a culture that is struggling mightily to build a society that's clearly less good than many other societies on offer. The average lifespan for women in Afghanistan is 44 years. They have a 12% literacy rate.
Why is that bad? You believe that women evolved out of stardust. Sam believes that women are highly evolved animals. Like, he literally believes that we came from animals. And if he doesn't call us animals, he's being inconsistent, because there's no reason to not call us animals if we just evolved in this chain of organisms. And some of those organisms he calls animals. Well, you better call us animals too. So, Sam, why are you concerned with these women who don't have good literacy rates, who die at a younger age than many populations in the world? Why are you so concerned about that, but you're not very concerned about the insects that you kill when you drive to work? Why are you so inconsistent, Sam? Why do you pick and choose which organisms get to thrive and be happy and have pleasure in their brains? And why do you condemn other people who have different opinions from you for carrying out their sense of morality? How can you condemn the psychopath who carries out his sense of morality based off of his values? You have no argument, you have no weight behind your argument against the psychopath. God's law condemns the psychopath because God tells us that we're created in the image of God. We bear the image of God, every single human being, and God's going to punish the psychopath on Judgment Day. God is going to inflict judgment because he's going to actually carry out justice through his law that applies to all people, and God says, hey, psychopath, you're wrong. God says to the psychopath, you shall not murder. God condemns the psychopath by giving his law. He's the lawgiver. God tells us how to determine that a psychopath is bad and that they're wrong, because he says, you should not do this. And when the creator of the universe, who determines the nature of reality, says, you should not do this, we understand we should not do it. And when we don't do it, that's how we define bad. When someone doesn't do that, that's how we define bad. That's how we define evil. When they do it, that's how we define good. It's so simple. But people, they hate God so much they try to find their way out of the lawgiver sense of morality, the ultimate lawgiver account for morality, to the point where they make moronic arguments like this.
They have almost the highest infant mortality and maternal mortality in the world, and almost the highest fertility. So this is one of the best places on earth to watch women and infants die.
And why is it why is it bad for women and infants to die? Why is human flourishing a good thing, Sam? He just assumes it. He's just arguing this whole time. Part of his argument is that human well-being is a foundation for morality. It's part of the foundation for morality. If not the only one. If not the defining aspect of his morality. He has this whole idea of human well-being is what we should strive for. And that's how we determine what's right or what's wrong. Well, you haven't answered the question of why it's good for humans to flourish. Why not just kill everybody off? Maybe humans are bad for the planet. Maybe the planet would be better. Maybe it would be better for other organisms if humans didn't exist. Maybe it would be better for all of the other animals, so-called, like, if you think we're animals, like if you're an atheist and thinking this way, maybe the atheist should say, wow, well, maybe it would be better if humans just stopped flourishing and they all died off. Maybe it would be better for the other organisms on planet Earth. So, like, how do you establish, Sam, that humans should flourish?
Seems
It's
to
just
me
this unjustified assumption.
perfectly obvious that the best response to this dire situation, which is to say the most moral response, is not to throw battery acid in the faces of little girls for the crime of learning to read.
But they're just highly evolved animals. Is it wrong to hunt animals? Is it wrong to kill a deer, Sam? Is it wrong to hit a mosquito with your car? How do you know? Why are you so inconsistent? It's okay to kill insects and cause their consciousness pain, but you don't like throwing battery acid in a little girl's face. Well, you shouldn't like the battery acid in the little girl's face, but you don't have any reason to explain why. You're so inconsistent. Your worldview is so stupid. So stupid. You can't even explain why in an atheistic worldview it's wrong to throw battery acid in a little girl's face. Because you can't explain why it's acceptable to slaughter deer for hunting. Is it wrong to throw battery acid in a deer's face? If not, why not? Is it wrong to shoot a deer? No, it's not wrong. Okay, then why is it wrong to shoot a little girl? Oh, that you don't have any. There's no way to answer. There's no answer to this. It's just complete inconsistency. They're just both organisms who evolved out of stardust. Why would one think that, oh, this certain animal should flourish? We just arbitrarily decided that. But deer, we can shoot them in the face. We can destroy those. We can kill ants as we walk. We can destroy mosquitoes. Like, why is he arbitrarily deciding that humans should be the species that flourishes?
Now, of course, this is common sense to us, unless you happen to be a bioethicist on the President's Commission at this moment. But I'm saying, at bottom, these are also truths about biology and neurology and psychology and sociology and economics. It is not unscientific to say that the Taliban are wrong about morality, that the moment we notice that we know anything at all about human well-being, we have to say this. Now, some people with a little philosophical training may be tempted to say, well, what if a father wants to burn off his daughter's face with battery acid? Who are you to say that he's not as moral as we are? What if he has an alternate conception of well-being that's just as legitimate?
Yeah.
Or who's to say that we should care about the well-being of little girls? This is the kind of email I get, incidentally.
Yeah, why? In an atheistic worldview, you're just matter in motion. You're just a random byproduct of an evolutionary process. You're just another animal. So, like, why? Why pick and choose which animal you favor, Sam?
Now, moral skeptics of this kind, and Dr. Craig has essentially endorsed this position in a way, without God, think that the only way to judge one person's values to be wrong are with respect to another person's values, and all such judgments have to be on a par. This is not true.
Why would they not be on par? They're all humans. You're all the same organism, emoting about different things, believing different things about the nature of reality. Why does he think that his conception of morality is better than the psychopaths?
True. There are many ways for my values to be objectively wrong. They can be wrong with respect to deeper values that I hold. They can be wrong with respect to deeper values that I would hold if I were only a deeper person.
How? Explain.
It's clearly possible to value things that will reliably make you miserable in this life.
And what's wrong with that? Explain. You're not explaining.
It's clearly possible to be cognitively and emotionally closed to experiences that you would want if you were only intelligent and knowledgeable enough to want them. it is possible not to know what one is missing in life. So
But why is it about pain? Why is it about certain chemical reactions?
things can be right or wrong, or good or evil, quite independent of a person's opinions.
Sure, it's called the law of God, and it tells you what's right or wrong regardless of human opinions.
Now, some of you might worry that I haven't defined well-being enough. How can something this loose as a concept be the benchmark of objective values? Well,
Yeah, I mean, who defines well-being? But you need to go further, Sam. You need to address why well-being for humans. Why not well-being for mosquitoes? Why not well-being for deer? Why not well-being for muskrats? What about the turtles?
consider by analogy the concept of physical health. Physical health is very difficult to define. You know, it used to be that if you were healthy, you could expect to live to the ripe old age of 40. You know, now our lifespan, our life expectancy has doubled in the last 150 years. What does health mean? Okay, well, it has
Yeah,
something
who
to do
defines
with not
health?
always vomiting, not being in excruciating pain, not running a fever. Okay, but how fast should a healthy person be able to run? That question might not have an answer. Okay, but this does not make the question of health vacuous. Okay,
It's vacuous if you can't explain why people should have well-being in the first place.
it doesn't make it merely a matter of opinion or of cultural construction. Okay, the distinction between a healthy person and a dead one is about as clear and consequential as any we ever make in science.
What's wrong with the dead human? Explain. You can't explain it. You're not explaining.
Okay, and notice that no one is ever tempted to attack the philosophical underpinnings of medicine with questions like, well, who are you to say that not always vomiting is healthy? What if you meet someone who wants to vomit, and he wants to vomit until he dies? Okay, how could you argue that he is not as healthy as you are?
Yeah, how?
In talking about morality and human values, I think we really are talking about mental health and the health of societies.
Well, your definition of mental health, who decides what mental health is? Someone could have a very different definition of mental health than you. The psychopath could have a very different definition of mental health than you do. He could say, oh, I'm perfectly healthy. Well, who are you to say he's not? The God of the Bible gives us all these instructions that we can use to assess everybody, and everybody gets judged by that law. But when you have a bunch of different little lawgivers running around who make their own rules for themselves, you're just bumping into each other and saying, well, I don't like that, and I don't like that. I don't like what you did. I don't like what you did. This is what I want to do, and it conflicts with what I want to do. Well, okay, now you've just got might makes right. And whoever's got the power, they're going to inflict their law on everybody else. And there's no way to have any weight behind your argument when you say, hey, you're actually wrong, you shouldn't do that. There's no higher law to appeal to. You're just appealing to your opinions. And one human's opinion is just as good as another human's opinion, because they're all the same type of creature. And it's just so incredibly ridiculous to think that one creature has a grip on what should happen and that they should be the lawgiver when there's a bunch of other self-lawgivers giving themselves laws, giving other people's laws, who are in the same playing field as anybody else. It's just opinions. I don't like this, I don't like that. That's all you've got in an atheistic worldview. Opinions, that's your morality. In the Christian worldview, we have the law that applies to everybody, the lawgiver who will judge everybody, the lawgiver who will punish and bring justice to evildoers, the lawgiver who will burn you forever if you do not obey him. There's some weight behind that. That makes sense.
And the truth is, science has always been in the values business. We simply cannot speak of facts without resorting to values. I mean, consider the simplest statement of scientific fact. Water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. This seems as value-free an utterance as human beings ever make. But what do we do when someone doubts the truth of this proposition? Okay, all we can do is appeal to scientific values, the value of understanding the world, the value of evidence, the value of logical consistency. What if someone says, well, That's not how I choose to think about water. Okay, I'm a biblical chemist, and I read in Genesis 1 that God created water before he created light. So I take that to mean that there were no stars. So there were no stars to fuse helium and hydrogen into heavier elements like oxygen. Therefore, there was no oxygen to put in the water. So either water has no oxygen, or God created special oxygen to put in the water. But I don't think he would do that, because that would be biblically inelegant. Okay, what can we say to such a person? Okay, all we can do is appeal to scientific values. And if he doesn't share those values, the conversation is over.
Well, how do you know the true nature of reality? How do you know it's true, Sam? How do you know that water exists? How do you know how water is produced? You assume that the scientific method can give you truth, but you can't even prove in your own worldview that you exist as a human being. How in the world could you justify the belief that other minds exist outside of your own mind? Or that your consciousness has existed over the past 20 years? How do you know you existed yesterday? Like, there's just deep philosophical questions that he can't even answer, and like, this is his argumentation. That he's talking about science. Well, you can't do science if you don't have revelation from the all-knowing being to tell us the true nature of reality. And he's not appealing to omniscience for truth, he's appealing to his limited consciousness. And because he doesn't know everything, he could always be wrong about everything he thinks is true, because there could be something he's not aware of that could invalidate everything he thinks is true. And that's why atheism is incredibly stupid.
If someone doesn't value evidence, what evidence are you going to provide to prove that they should value it?
Well, how do you have evidence in a worldview in which you evolved out of stardust and your brain is the product of evolution? How do you know that your brain evolved in such a manner as to ascertain correctly the right nature of reality, the true nature of reality? How do you know that your brain evolved in a manner as to be able to ascertain truth? You can't prove that. Maybe your brain evolved in such a manner as to deceive you. Evolution is just completely unjustifiable. You can't know anything if evolution is true, because you can't justify any beliefs. If you evolved out of stardust, then you're left with finite consciousness. You have no revelation from omniscience to tell you it's true, and there's no way for you to justify any belief that you have, because you're believing that your brain evolved out of stardust, that your brain evolved over billions of years or millions of years into what it is now, and you have no way of determining that your thoughts are actually giving you the correct perception of reality, because your brain could have evolved in such a way as to bring about deceptive thoughts that don't perceive the world correctly. Just complete stupidity is all that atheists have to hold on to. It's just complete and utter stupidity is what their arguments are reduced to. If you can use the presuppositional method of apologetics to reduce them to absurdity, you have to show the atheist how stupid the worldview is. Their worldview.
If someone doesn't value logic, what logical argument could you provide to show the importance of logic? Okay, so I think this split between facts and values should look really strange to you on its face. I mean, what are we really saying when we say that science can't be applied to the most important questions in human life?
It can be, but only in the Christian worldview. You can use science to determine what's true about reality, but only because God created an orderly universe, and he told us that human beings exist and that the world exists and that he created it, and because he's revealed to us the true nature of reality. Because God has revealed to us through innate knowledge of himself that the world is orderly and that there's a creator who holds it together, we can be justified in our beliefs about the things that we ascertain through science. And therefore, science can be used to tell us how to alleviate suffering and what kind of suffering is happening. And we can engage all of that through the Christian worldview. And we can understand all of that through the Christian worldview and judge it by God's law. If you don't have God's law, what you're doing with the scientific facts is just giving your opinions about them. And, okay, here's this fact, but Well, I don't even know if it's a fact because my brain could be deceiving me because it evolved over however long. Okay, I have the scientific fact, but now I'm just giving my opinion about it, and there's no objective law that applies to everybody that I can appeal to make any moral statement about it. Yeah, this is like philosophy 101, and this dude can't even get it. He needs to radically change his entire epistemology, and he needs God. That's what he needs.
Okay, we're saying that when we get our biases out of the way, when we most fully rely on clear reasoning and honest observation, when intellectual honesty is at its zenith, well, then those efforts have no application whatsoever to the most important questions in human life. But that is precisely the mood you cannot be in to answer the most important questions in human life. It would be very strange if that were so.
So there you have it. The idiotic arguments of Sam Harris, who desperately needs to repent and get right with the God that he knows exists but refuses to acknowledge. Pray for him that he would stop being stupid and stop making moronic statements and stop leading people astray. And for everybody who watched this video, if you're an atheist, it's time for you to stop believing stupid things and to start believing in the God of the Bible who tells us what's true and what's right and what's wrong. Any appealing to any other authority will land you in a subjective morass, a swamp of illusions and delusions with no way out, no way to arbitrate between any position, no way to judge truly what the true nature of reality is and what is actually right and what is actually wrong. Because you're just in a sea of opinions, and opinions do not constitute morality. Laws tell us what morality is. Morality is constituted by law. Someone saying, you ought not do this. A lawgiver who judges those he gives the law to.